Glad you could join us. Welcome to Candid Conversation on Hard Copy. Coming to you from our studios in Abuja, I am Terry Ikumi. Now, our focus tonight is on a rather somewhat controversial subject, which has generated quite some arguments for and against. Genetically modified foods or organisms, GMOs. Now, there are disputes over foods generated from genetically modified crops instead of conventional crops. Some are questioning its safety, long-term effect and impact on the environment, and whether Africa and indeed Nigeria is ready for such a huge technology. Now, considering the stringent measures required for regulations, those questions are arising. Now, GM crops are so far only commercially available in South Africa, Egypt, and Burkina Faso. But there have been field trials in Kenya and also in Senegal and Zimbabwe, where there was no public knowledge or regulatory oversight. At least 12 African countries are carrying out research on GM crops, including Egypt, Uganda, Morocco, Nigeria, Tunisia, and Cameroon. There are also concerns that GM crops are coming in by way of food imports and seed smuggling instead of being locally researched. Now, my guest tonight is a professor of plant breeding and geneticist at the Institute for Agriculture Research, Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, Kaduna State, Professor Ishaku Mohammed. Prof, welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Prof, in the simplest terms, could you explain to us the process of genetic modification of crops?
Genetic modification entails identification of a gene. A gene is that unit in an organism that determines the expression of a character. For example, the size of seed, resistance to disease, and so on and so forth. So scientists have developed ways of identifying specific genes controlling specific characters in organisms. Genetic modification enables across species transfer of genes from one species to another, as opposed to conventional methods of breeding, where interaction of genes are only allowed through matings using flowers or reproductive organs in higher animals through sperm or pollen grain for the exchange of this genetic material. Genetic modification now can enable scientists to take a particular gene or heritable material from, say, rice into sorghum, or from cauliflower into rice, and vice versa. For example, if you want to express resistance to a disease which does not exist in a particular species, say rice, you have to go and look for resistance gene in another organism, whether it is hibiscus or sorghum or sugarcane, and then cut that gene and put it into the tissue of a selected rice plant, and then regenerate many of these rice, and from there you grow a normal rice.
Just to be clear, it's this crossbreeding you mentioned is not two different crops, it's the same crop, just altering the DNA of that particular crop. Is that right? In
the conventional process, it's the same species. It's like a species of rice. There are different strains within the same species. So if you want to do crossbreeding conventionally, you have to take your gene from one strain A into strain B. But in genetic modification, you can go outside that species. From rice, you can take it into sorghum or guinea corn or maize. Now, in the conventional means, you use the reproductive organs of rice, which is the flowers and the pollen grain. Whereas in the genetic modification, you use the tissue, part of the tissue that will take the gene.
What's the purpose of this modification?
The purpose of the modification is that when scientists search the whole genome, that is the gene bank of that species, and the gene of interest is lacking in that species, then and yet is a big problem that needs to be solved through the development of new varieties. You now use genetic modification. For example, in this instance, the cowpea variety that we have developed using genetic modification, we have tested 15,000 different strains of beans. None of them have resistance to this insect. So the only option left to us, there are only two options to control the insect. You either use sprays of usually harmful insecticides to kill the insect in the field, or for you to develop a variety that can protect itself, you have to use genetic modification.
Are you saying that the main reason for genetic modification is to fight diseases?
It is to fight diseases.
What else?
It is to resist drought. It is to resist insects. It is to increase, let's say, quality traits like protein content, sugar content, and so on and so forth.
Are these need areas that we found as a country, we found necessary to improve upon? Or is this technology one that has been sold to us from the outside world that we are just adopting?
No. We have real areas of needs. That is where we are projecting these technologies.
What are these areas?
We have, right now, we have salinity problems in all our irrigable areas. The soil becomes very salty. Many of the crops cannot withstand that high level of alkalinity, and so crops cannot do. This is one area where this technology can be deployed to solve problem. We have insect problems, both in storage and in the field. You know that the only way we protect our crops is by depending on imported insecticides to protect these crops, and some of them have very harmful effect at the end of the day, either on the environment, killing many other non-targeted organisms, or giving even health and even resulting in death.
So you're saying that genetically modifying a crop would solve all these problems and still have no negative effect on health or environment of the consumers?
Definitely, this is very correct to say so.
Then why do we have so much controversies around the GMOs?
Now, the controversies are stemming from, first of all, poor understanding of the technology, and it is natural with human society. Whenever you have a new thing introduced, people have concern before they get used to it. I will imagine at the time when the jet engine was discovered and there is transatlantic flight, there are many people who have reservations against flying across the Atlantic Ocean because the airplane may crash and then they will go down, in spite of the fact that safety measures might have been shown to the public. Regulators have tested these safety measures, and yet there will still be a number of doubting Thomas that if that technology, the aviation technology, is anything to rely upon. So also this new technology of genetic engineering, which creates new varieties with additional economic potentials, many people will think twice about it until when it becomes part of our life. Then without even knowing it, we'll be doing it. For example, in other countries, they do it. So the second one is, you know, there are business interests. Those businesses that rely on selling their products, and if the uptake of their products will be interfered with the introduction of the product of this technology, they will have to go behind the scene to discourage the uptake of this technology.
You mentioned poor understanding of the technology. In this case, I'll ask you, for who? Are you saying a poor understanding of the technology is for the consumers?
It's for both. The consumers and even scientists. You will be surprised to know that not all scientists have the capacity to understand this process.
Do we have scientists in Nigeria?
I am one of them.
You are handling this project.
Yes.
Apart from you, how many other persons are involved in this project? And I ask this because you'll agree with me that one of the questions that have arisen from this GMO modification process is whether or not we have the capacity to handle this technology. It's a huge one, so much so that up till now, only about 3 countries in the whole of Africa have it commercially available. Plus Nigeria only just approved Podboro cowpea.
Yes.
So, from a scientist's point of view, what level of understanding do you think that we have to be able to handle this technology?
We have tremendous capability in Nigeria to handle this. My institute is one of many that have scientists with comparable capacity to me and my colleagues who can handle this technology, given all the requirements that they need and they go ahead to pursue it. So it's not a rocket technology that requires special brains or special and unique characteristics. It's an ordinary understanding of genetics and then applying it to produce products.
Why then are there fears of health risks?
Now,
for example, we have worries, we have documents that I can't quote because they're unverified, but people have questioned the health risks involved, especially long-term effects of consumption of GM products.
You see, when people bring unverifiable, scientifically unverifiable things close to superstition, then you have a big problem to understand. Unfortunately, sometimes people who pose themselves as scientists might equally even be used to promote this kind of wrong understanding by individuals. In science, we have universally acceptable practices, comparable, verifiable by peers all over the world, and this is what is being applied to this product. In spite of all this, I would like to go back to that interest, business interest, that other people's interest, both political and economic interest, is going to be undermined to some extent, and unfortunately significant enough. So they will not sit back and allow this technology to be exploited, especially by resource-poor farmers in Africa. Now, one of the things I thought, and then going back to the safety of long-term safety, is what is long-term? If it is long-term, even flying in aircraft, we can say it is not long enough for us to say it is safe, even though it has been here around for more than 80 years of use. So if someone wants to create any alibi to promote his own line of thinking, he can create anything to see it. But coming back to GMOs, GMOs have been under consumption, commercial consumption, for more than 20 years now, and not a single incident of health or environmental risk has been associated with the product of this technology.
With that, I had a conversation with some persons who are against the GMOs, and one of the points they raised against this was that as much as these GMOs have been commercially available without the knowledge of certain business, because you'll agree with me that we have GMOs on our shelves in some supermarkets, you will agree with me, and that would be because they're imported. They're not locally produced. So the question now is, local production of GMOs, how trustworthy is it? Plus, are you not worried that this technology, or better still, this whole process could fall into the wrong hands, people who are only interested in the commercial value, and thereby undermining the seriousness or quality of what we produce eventually?
I don't think if I have grasped your question properly, but if your concern is whether or not some people will use this technology to undermine our economy, I will say that fear is unfounded. We have a number of regulatory things in this country. We have the National Seed Council, which regulates the production and sales of seed to individuals. We have the Food and Drug Regulatory Agency, NAFDAC, and so many other health-related agencies in the country. And all of them put together, I don't think if all of them will fold their arms for our economy to be undermined. And besides, those of us who are working on this project, I come from a farming family. I know what the problems the farmers are facing, and I know to what extent this technology holds solution to those problems. Unfortunately for us, many of those people you are alluding to who talk against this technology. I don't know whether they are specifically targeting some categories of this technology or not the others, but I want to tell you that these are people who are not associated with those problems facing our own society.
Very well
Talk
then.
less of recognizing the economic potentials of the solution.
All right, Prof, we have to take a break now. We'll be right back after this quick break, and when we return, we'll look at GMOs from the point of view of the farmers. Join us again.